Okay, I have 12 noon. I say we get started. Welcome. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I'm with Virginia Community Capital, and I'm happy to partner on this webinar series with the Southwest Virginia Small Business Development Center Network, UVA's College at Wise, and Aegis IT Solutions. Before we get started and I turn it over to our host today, I wanted to give you some few housekeeping things. Due to security and so forth, we have muted everyone, but we do want to hear from you during Jonathan's presentation. If you have questions, if you will post those in the Q&A section or in the chat, we will address those afterwards. And this is being recorded for education and training purposes, and it will be available online on Virginia Community Capital's Facebook page, also on our YouTube channel, and I'm sure that our partners, the Small Business Development Centers, will post it on their site. So it will be available to you, because I know Jonathan will hit you with a lot of great information, and it's tough sometimes to get it all that's coming from his mind and brain, and to catch it all so you have opportunity to see it. So I'm happy to have Margie Douglas with the Southwest Virginia Small Business Development Center. We have been working together in different roles in economic and community development, small business development for, I won't say how many years, but a long time. So I'm going to turn it over to Margie, and she will introduce our speaker today and serve as our host. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandy. I'm so excited to be here today. This has been a wonderful series for not only small businesses, but also for the Small Business Development Center. I'm happy to have my colleagues in the Southwest region, Cindy Fields, Mandy Archer, and Becky O'Quinn. And always happy to partner with Sandy and, of course, UVA Wise and Aegis. Today's Refocus and Rebuild topic is managing hardware and software assets, tracking warranties. We are happy and blessed to have Jonathan Eviden with us from Aegis IT Solutions, and we're excited to hear what he has to say about this particular topic. Jonathan is the president and founder of Aegis IT, located in Kingsport, Tennessee. He has been full-time in the IT industry since 2004 and started Aegis IT in 2012. In the rare moments he's not in front of a computer, he loves playing board games and watching Netflix with his wife and son. Jonathan, we really appreciate the time and the expertise that you have given us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Excellent. Thanks, Margie. I really love giving these presentations. So today's topic falls in the category of extremely practical, but not very glamorous. This is tracking scammers and cybersecurity. Those are a bit more glamorous. Those have a bit more pizzazz when you're talking about them. But this is extremely practical, and hardly anybody does this well. So today we're going to talk about managing hardware and software assets. I'm going to talk about what do we typically manage when we involve in hardware and software. How do we manage those assets? What are some options that you can use? What are some additional considerations? And we'll just go through the whole topic. So just by way of introduction, I started fixing computers in the mid-90s as a junior high. Basically, it's a passion, it's a hobby, and I get paid to do it. So it's a wonderful thing. I love it. I started full-time enterprise IT in 2005. I had been doing other IT work prior to that, and then started Aegis in 2012. Absolutely love working for myself, and I've got some great people working with me. Aegis IT, we provide hardware and software support. We do managed IT services. We do disaster recovery and prevention, and we also do hardware and software management, which is baked into our core management software provider software. So it's something that our clients lean heavily on us when it comes to asset management, because as we'll discuss, hardly anyone is doing this themselves. Okay, so quick overview. Asset management is principally tracking the age and status of hardware and software in your organization. And normally, if I was in a room, I'd say, give me a show of hands and put up your hand if you are doing this now. And I would probably get very few hands. For small businesses, it's something that is typically not even given much consideration. even a medium business will sometimes do this poorly or not very well. We've got a client that has a couple hundred computers, and their asset management has been spotty at best. And I'm not going to go into the details, but we as a small company have better asset tracking than they as a slightly larger company. So it's something that can affect everybody. Like I said, it's not glamorous. This is a core operational issue, but it's also frequently ignored, and it becomes a problem only when you have failure. So the reason we're going to talk about this as a core issue is because good asset management allows opportunities for proactive system management. Basically, when you have a list of devices, when you know how old those devices are, when you have a list of software, when you know how old that software is, who the vendor is, and when your updates are done, then you are able to plan your system management, saying, okay, I bought this laptop. I can expect, we'll call it 5 years of life. So if I buy it in 2021, then in 2026, I need to reassess this device. Now, you might have situations where the system will fail before that, and it does happen. But assuming that you have a decent idea and decent plan for what the equipment is and what kind of life expectancy you can get out of it, then you'll be able to be more proactive in just determining how to manage and upgrade and update your systems. Bad or non-existent asset management typically means you're merely being reactive. You are making changes only because failures occur. So maybe you upgrade your desktop because it died rather than because it was 8 years old and time to be replaced. We run into that frequently. We frequently encounter businesses that we use laptops that say they bought at Walmart for $200 and then wonder why the system's not performing very well. Or they've got a 10-year-old laptop and they want to update it so that it runs a little bit faster. We certainly can. At 10 years old, there's limitations as to how much extra performance we can squeeze out of a laptop of that age. But there are things we can do, and there are clients who have insisted on paying us to make those updates. And we'll do them. I wouldn't recommend it, but we'll do them. So my goal is to encourage you to assess your organization asset management system, if you have one, and put one in place, because there's a huge difference between not having one or having a bad one versus having a good one. So asset management applies to both hardware and software. For software, you typically want to know what software is out there for the purposes of security and stability. For example, in our world, there was a major Microsoft Exchange exploit that came out earlier this year. Exchange handles email and affected tens of thousands of servers around the world. Basically gave remote access if someone knew how to exploit or how to manage that exploit. So you have email system administrators who are rushing to apply the patches and rushing to handle this because this is a serious issue. And if you don't know what version number you have, and if you don't know what the updates are, you don't know if you're vulnerable to that exploit, and that becomes a pretty important issue. Hardware management is critical because of hardware failure. So I'm going to give you on a later slide a list of different devices that we typically manage, and we're going to talk about expected lifespan for all of them. Different devices, different vendors will have different expectations for when failure will occur. And just because you can expect failure to occur doesn't mean that it will at that time, and it doesn't mean that it won't before then. So if you expect the desktop to last 5 years, it might fail in 2. It might fail in 8. It might fail in 10. It just depends on what the hardware is. But the idea is to plan for when you're going to replace it to have a smoother experience during the lifespan of that hardware. And if you have more than a few devices, you're going to have a hard time keeping track of all this information unless you have a centralized or consolidated platform for managing it. So let's talk about asset management and hardware. For hardware, we typically like to track things like who the vendor is and what the model number is. So I'm going to use my laptop as an example later on. I have a Dell. It's a Latitude 3510. Okay, so that because we deal with Dells and because I know the model numbers, that gives me an idea, just knowing the model number, a rough estimate as to how old that laptop is. Typically, we like to know when the purchase date is. Sometimes this is easy to look up. Sometimes you need to keep track of your receipts. It just depends on who the vendor is. It depends on how you purchased it, what the warranty expiration date is. This can be critical for key devices or servers, especially if you have a device that can be hard to replace. Having a warranty can be extremely important. And typically we recommend getting a warranty even for something basic. There's nothing like having a critical system failure and then finding out that you're going to have to pay the price for a new device or a new server, or, you know, that we buy warranties typically, and we highly recommend our clients maintain them. Service tag or a serial number. With a lot of devices, this can add up pretty quickly, but knowing which device and which serial number it is, basically, that allows you to track, say, problems tied to that individual device or track the warranty. So Dell has a 7-digit service tag, and they also have a 12-digit express code. You know, different vendors do different things. We also like to keep track of the hardware specifications, such as the RAM, the processor, the disk space, what type of disk, what type of computer. This becomes important, especially as software changes. So for example, 15 years ago, if I put 4 gigabytes of RAM in a system, that was going to run pretty well. And so 4 gigs of RAM was basically what we were targeting. Even up till 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 4 gigs of RAM was fine. But with Windows 10, we have seen serious performance problems with only 4 gigabytes of RAM. And so we are typically targeting at least 8. And if we can get someone to put in 16, that's great. That's just how things have changed over time. And so when it comes to the purposes of asset management, if you need to run a report as to how many computers have this amount of RAM, that becomes incredibly easy on a full-fledged system. Otherwise, you're left at, okay, this computer's running slow. Maybe I need to check the hardware specifications. And a great proactive option is, when do you expect to need to replace this particular device? This is something we hardly ever see people planning, and it's a question that we get asked very, very frequently with businesses. Basically, they have this firewall, or they have this server, or they have this desktop or this laptop, and they want to know whether they should update it. You know, maybe they need to add more RAM, or they need to put in a bigger hard drive, or do they need to replace the whole thing entirely? And typically we do that on a case-by-case basis, but that's more reactive. If we were doing if we were sitting down and coming up with a proactive management plan with a client, we'd say, here's all your devices. This is when you should be replacing them. Even if they're working perfectly functioning, or if they're functioning perfectly fine, it's still a pretty good idea to replace them for maximum smoothness in your work. I do know, I've heard through the grapevine, and I don't know this firsthand, but there is a large organization in the area where they proactively replace desktops basically every 2 years. And as someone who would love to get that hardware contract, because that means that they're buying a lot of computers on a regular basis, it does mean that they do so to minimize the potential downtime, because their systems are being replaced while they're still functioning, instead of waiting until they fail. And it's also incredibly helpful to know who the current user is and the location. If it's a desktop or a laptop, who's got the information, who's got that computer. If it's a firewall and you've got multiple buildings or multiple floors, which floor is that firewall in? Where's that switch located? Where are these access points? I've had situations where someone installed wireless access points in a ceiling, and we had to spend a bunch of time trying to find where the access points physically were, because no one knew where they were. If you had some sort of tracking, then you'd be able to know that these access points are located on this section of the drop ceiling. And an asset tag ID, if one is in use. We do have clients where they have their own asset tags. And, that's you can go buy a roll of 1,000 of those on Amazon for $100 or something, or you can print them off yourself with a label maker. Basically, it gives you the opportunity to uniquely identify a device or really anything with a unique tag for your organization. So we've had situations where people will do asset tags on, say, doors and even non IT equipment, just for the sake of being able to know what that device is, what that piece of equipment is, and be able to track service calls, for example. So what are typical hardware devices that we track? We like to track laptops, we like to track desktops, we like to track servers, tablets, routers, firewalls, switches, access points, printers, camera systems, and phones. Now, what's important to note is that all of these have different lifetime expectancies. So for the purposes of tax, laptops and desktops are amortized over 3 years. So you could functionally say that 3 years is about the expected lifetime of a desktop or laptop. If I look behind me, I've got my 7-year-old laptop, which still works perfectly fine. It's just sort of falling apart, which is why I upgraded it. So it's possible to get far more than your 3 years. In fact, it's pretty typical. Our rule of thumb is that less than 3 years, if you've got a critical hardware failure on a system and it's under 3 years, then let's just get it fixed because it's typically still under warranty. If it's 3 to 5 years, then we decide, based on what the failure is it worth repairing that part? Maybe it's just the hard drive died, then that's probably worth repairing. And if it's over 5 years, then you're probably in the range where you just need to upgrade the system. Servers, once again, you can get a 5-year warranty pretty typically from vendors. If I'm not getting 5 to 7 years out of a server, I'm not typically happy with it. When I design networks for clients, I'm picking equipment that I would fully expect to last between 6 and 7 years when it comes to servers. Tablets, that depends on the user, depends on how rough they are, depends on how many opportunities there are for the tablet to get dropped and break. Something like a router or firewall depends on the vendor. We use SonicWall. I'm very happy with SonicWall. I've got SonicWalls that have lasted for 10 years and they still worked fine. We've got one of our competitors uses a model firewall that die very frequently, and I can almost tell that they're doing the support because I walk in and I see a stack of old dead firewalls in the closet, and I know, okay, that's this client or that's this IT provider, and I try and pick equipment that's not going to do that. So all of these have different lifetime expectancies, and that's going to be a conversation to have based on what types of devices you're buying and how frequently do you want to have to replace them. So, if we were in person, I would probably say, give me a show of hands. How many of you can tell me how many of these devices you have in your organization right now? How many laptops do you have? How many desktops do you have? How many phones do you have? And our typical response would be almost no one would know, because this stuff just doesn't get tracked. Part of our value-added service is we come in with a platform that allows our clients to be able to track this, as well as provide us with an opportunity to tell them when they need to update and upgrade systems. Okay, so let's talk about software. For software, we typically like to track what the date of the install is, what's the serial number or license key, how many people are using the system, where was it installed, is it on the cloud, is it on this server, is it on this workstation, what's the sales and support number. This could be extremely critical. If you've got a core piece of software and it goes down, you don't want to have to be searching for that support number. It's nice to have that right at your fingertips to be able to call and get them on the phone. So having that knowledge in advance will help in the issue, help when you have a disaster. Installation instructions, if applicable. Frequently, it's nice to know how to reinstall it if there's an issue, or how to repair it, or if we get a new workstation and I need to install the client, what do I got to do, and do I need to call the vendor to do it? And backup and restore information. This is extremely important. We like to know, in order to back up this particular program, we have to take a backup of this SQL database, or we need to capture this folder on the server, or maybe on these workstations, we need to back up this. This is extremely important, especially since disaster recovery is just a huge deal. You would be extremely it would be a considerable amount of lack of foresight if you don't have this information as to how to back it up and how to restore it if there's an issue. And then, very importantly, what are the platforms that support this piece of software? So, for example, we deal a lot with QuickBooks, and it is possible to get, say, QuickBooks 2014, which at this point is 7 years old, working on Windows 10. It doesn't work very well. It's not really supported. You could technically get Microsoft Office 2003 to run on Windows 10. It's not supported. It's not going to work very well, but I've seen it happen. And in that situation, it's very helpful to know that if you're putting in this new piece of hardware, that it's not going to run your very old program, or you want to buy the newest version of this program, but because your hardware is so old that it's not going to run. And we encounter both of those situations. For example, a couple of months ago, I was over at a small business and they had a copy of QuickBooks 2009. 2009, yeah. So their copy of QuickBooks was 12 years old, and they needed to upgrade to the latest version for a couple of different things. Actually, they were wanting to upgrade the computer that it was running on. And so QuickBooks 2009 worked perfectly fine on the computer that was installed on, but it would not run on 2010 because it's just not, or sorry, Windows 10, because it's just not supported. So in that particular case, we couldn't just upgrade QuickBooks 2009 to QuickBooks 2021. There was this huge process that took about an hour and a half to finally get it working on the latest copy of QuickBooks. So in this case, I knew that that version of QuickBooks would not work on the latest version of Windows 10. And so as a result, there's a decently involved upgrade process to make that work. That would be all stuff you could know in advance if you were having a proper management platform, especially of your software. Okay, so let's talk about some of the mechanics. So how do you actually manage your assets? For the most part, the answer is you don't. That's the answer we get when we walk into a lot of businesses. There is no management of your assets. If I were to go into any of our clients prior to us, doing work for them and say, hey, how many laptops do you have? How many desktops do you have? And how old are they? They just sort of look at me with, we've got, this person has this, maybe they can run through a list in their head, but they're not going to know that this one's Windows 7, this one's Windows 10, this one has 4 gigs of RAM, this has 8 gigs of RAM, right? So this is not common. That kind of level of detail is not, we do not commonly encounter it. So there are a couple of different options. I wanted to talk about 3 in depth and then list some other options after talking about those 3. They will, of course, depend on your size and your budget. I'm going to give you 2 basically free ones and then a paid one. And then I'll have some other paid options after that. So the easy answer is if you create an Excel spreadsheet, you'd still be better off than the majority of places that we walk into. It pains me to say that, but it's true. So I took, I basically just put in a simple spreadsheet. I took my laptop. You can see, vendor, that's the host name, that's where it's located. There's the model number, that's how much RAM, there's my processor, there's my hard drive, and there's my purchase date. And so if you had something that looked like this, you would be better off than about, 90% of the places we walk into, because they don't even have this. So as for Excel, why do people use Excel? It's very easy to set up. Almost everybody has it in a business environment. If you've got Office, you've got Excel, and it's more common than not to find business computers having Excel. So basically that means you're not paying for anything because you've already paid for everything. If you've got Office, you've got Excel. The reason why it pains me to talk about Excel is because it does not scale. If you've got 100 computers trying to do that in a spreadsheet, you're going to have a pretty hard time. Yes, you can do filters. Yes, there's conditional highlighting. There's a bunch of things you can do, but the data manipulation is not great. The reporting is not great. There's so many things that are not good for larger installs. Manual updating is required unless you start getting into things like running scripts through PowerShell or maybe some reporting through Active Directory. Like there are some options where you could automate it and dump it into Excel, but now you're not using Excel, you're using other tools on top of it. But if you do just Excel, and if you're just a small business owner that is trying to track your own stuff, then you're going to be manually updating this, and you have to remember how to manually update it in case if there's any changes. So it's a great entry-level option, and it's great if you're small, but you're going to quickly outgrow Excel. And it's very clunky. I mean, there's not really reporting unless you have a separate reporting module that hooks into your Excel spreadsheet. So once again, if you use Excel, you're still better off, but it's not going to help you as you grow. Ideally, you'll get a business would have some sort of asset management platform, some sort of software. A great free option is one I've used in the past. I don't currently use it for reasons I'll explain on the next slide, but Spiceworks is great. They have a ton of information that's available for free. They've got some great software. Like I said, I've used it in the past, and I really like the software. It just doesn't match what we are needing right now. That's just a quick screenshot, so you can see they've got some nice interface. It's a lot nicer than Excel. That's a pretty important thing. You can get a lot of detail about this particular computer, so you can see, you got your serial number, you've got the operating system, you got the processor, here's the RAM. You can tell this is an old screenshot because it's running Windows XP and it's got a Pentium 4. So this has got to be 12 or 13-year-old screenshot. You've got all this information that can be found in here. This is going to be hard to put into Excel, and it's going to be a lot of manual labor to take all this information and put this into Excel. Whereas with Spiceworks, it's finding this information with running a scan on the network. All right, so just a little bit more about Spiceworks. It's completely free, which is wonderful, and that's the appeal. That's how it gets into places. As long as you host it yourself. They do have a paid version that you can pay them to host for you. So that's how they, as the organization, make money, is they do have a paid version. It allows you to manage both hardware and software, so you're getting asset management for both. Once again, it's very great. And it has also a module for help desk, which is why I first was looking at it many years ago. So for being a completely free piece of software, it is fantastic. The downsides are that it does not scale to large networks. So for a small organization, if you've got a single building and you've got maybe 100 computers, this is a fantastic option and I highly recommend it. If you've got multiple locations, it doesn't work so well. It'll work. You can make it work. You just need to have a server that runs it. So now you're paying extra for this quote unquote free software. And this right here, that multiple locations, is a limitation for us because of all the different clients that we have in all the different locations. So it's great for entry level. It's a massive step up over Excel, but it's not going to grow with you as you get to be a larger organization. Enable is our platform. This is what we actually use. This is our asset management. It's a core IT process. We use it for more than asset management. It allows us to do well, in this case, we since we're talking about asset management, I've got it on the next slide. It allows us to run reports based on hardware. We can search for software. A couple years ago, we needed to upgrade our Windows 7 computers. Well, not our Windows 7 computers, but the Windows 7 computers that we manage for clients. And that was because Microsoft was phasing it out. It was no longer HIPAA compliant. Anything with financial, it was and there was still a good number of Windows 7 computers that were installed at clients. So what we did is we ran a report and said, okay, give me a list of all the Windows 7 computers. And then from there, we filtered out that report to be able to say which ones have enough RAM and CPU that we can just directly upgrade to Windows 10. Which ones can we put in a little bit more RAM and maybe a solid state and they will run Windows 10. And which ones are so old that Windows 10 will just die and we just need to fully replace them. So the nice part for us is that we were able to do this across all our clients, across all devices with just a few clicks. That's going to be possible in Excel, for example, but you're going to have to spend a lot of time putting that in to get to that point. And any updates would have to be manually done. So you could be working with stale data or outdated data if you're depending on Excel. I could probably do this with Spiceworks as well, but I would need a server at every client in order to be able to get their information. So for us, because of how Enable works, we just install an agent on your computer. It checks in every 60 minutes for desktops and every 15 minutes for servers. and it makes any changes that get done are automatically reflected on the platform. So it's, for us, it's fantastic, and we're able to do it across all our clients. So just some screenshots. This is what my laptop looks like on the Enable platform. You can see it automatically pulls the RAM, the processor. There's my model number. I blacked out my serial number. This is what it looks like. You can see the software that I've got installed. You can see I've got Thunderbird, Adobe Acrobat Reader. You can see what printer I've got because Brother installs the printer software. You can see I've got Chrome, Classic Shell. This is just a partial list. The list goes on. So I can see the version number. I can see when it was installed. I've got all these details across every single computer for all our clients. And then this is what it looks like when I log in to connect to someone's computer. You can see that's my computer, that's Ken's computer. I can see what version of the agent is there. You can see I've got when I installed our software, because my laptop's newer. I just recently upgraded, so it's got install date of January. So we've got all this information that we are very quickly and able to see. And once again, this works for us because of multi-site and all the different clients. Additionally, Enable has our asset management for hardware and software. It allows us to do remote access for clients. It provides antivirus capabilities. We can do content filtering and patch management. This is not a sales pitch for Enable. This is why we like it so much, and this is why we've invested heavily in the platform. It works well for us. There is a minimum charge, so that's why it would not be a great choice for a smaller business. The minimum charge is no big deal for us because of how many computers we have on the platform. This is the type of platform that will scale into tens of thousands of computers, unlike something like Spiceworks, which is going to have a hard time over 1,000. They have that in their documentation. But it costs us money. So, this is not, Spiceworks is free, but has a hard limit. This will scale, but costs us money. And so this is a platform like this is a great option for large scale multi-site deployment, which is basically what we require. So other options abound. There's tons of vendors out there. This is when you start getting to the level that I'm describing, like on Enable, you're talking enterprise asset management, or EAM is how it's referred to. And Kaseya is another vendor that I've used in the past. Microsoft Intune, I've got a couple clients that use this. This also allows tightly integrated mobile device management. So you can put policies on phones, tablets, and other things that I can sort of manage that through Enable, but not at the level that you can on Intune. So if you have a bunch of mobile devices, Intune is going to potentially be the better option. It's also more expensive. So that's the trade-off. Trackage is software that I used 15 years ago when I was at a different employer. It's once again combination help desk and asset management. It's a desktop application, so it's been around for a long time. Ninja RMM, it's just another platform, and there's so many. If you do a search for enterprise asset management, there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and they all vary in price. I mean, you can end up paying a considerable amount per month depending on who the vendor is and what you need managed. So that's partly why we've been happy with Enable. We get a ton of support and a large variety of features for something that's reasonably inexpensive compared to other vendors that operate in this platform. So let's talk about some vendor-specific platforms. So some vendors have asset management platforms tailored for their devices or software. Software vendors that do this tend to focus on license usage and allocation, meaning how many licenses are you using versus how many did you purchase, because they don't want you to go over. They want to make sure that you are not using more than what you pay for, of course. Hardware vendors tend to focus on device age and support status. So if you buy a firewall, SonicWall is going to try and upsell you SonicWall Cisco, WatchGuard, and any of the big firewall vendors. They're going to try and upsell you on security services and warranties, and they're going to provide you a platform to be able to manage all that. Common vendors with large management platforms, Microsoft. If you have a volume license agreement for Microsoft, there's a place to log in that shows you every single software option you can download, how many license keys you've used, how many license keys are available. So if you are a client that's purchased, 100 copies of Office and 50 copies of Windows 10 and 2 copies of Server and Exchange and all these Microsoft products. You log into volume license software, you might have hundreds of options to pick from, but they're all there. They're all centrally located. You don't have to log into different locations to look up all your retail licenses. So the volume license software has significant appeal, especially for large organizations. And if you're on the more retail side, you can get Office 365 subscription. Maybe it's a five computer pack for Office. You log in, it'll tell you what are all the devices that you've installed it on, and it's really great for home users and for small business, very, very small installs. Adobe, that's a big company. A lot of our clients use it. They have the Creative Control Suite, and that tells you how many times you've installed Photoshop, how many people can use Photoshop at the same time, Lightroom, and any of the other Adobe platforms. Adobe Reader Professional, for example, or I guess it's called DC at this point. So Adobe is going to have a software management platform to manage the licenses and updates and make sure everything is on the up and up there. Sonic, well, I mentioned them because it's a vendor that we like. They have a platform where you can register your firewall, and it's going to tell you all the information for the licensing. So if you're an organization with like 50 firewalls, you can log in one place and see the status of every single firewall. It's very nice for that purpose. Ubiquity, we love Ubiquity for access points. They have other devices that you can manage, switches, firewalls, and some other items. You can log into one location and see the firmware status, how many clients are on, how much traffic has throughput. Basically anything important to the wireless access point, you can see from one location. So the vendors like to provide that because it gives you more information. There is some lock-in that occurs, but this way, if you buy, for example, 100 copies of Office from Volume License, it's all in one place. You're using a single key, and you can use it up to 100 times. If you're buying 100 copies of Office retail on Amazon, well, now you have 100 different keys that you have to manage. And did I install this key on this computer or this laptop? And that becomes more painful. So you can even have asset management as a way of influencing purchasing and licensing of software. For example, when you have a list of software, you can compare that to how many you've purchased. So if you've got 20 computers and you see that you've got Microsoft Office installed on 20 of them, but you've purchased 18, well, now you know you're too short. Or maybe you've purchased 25 and now you know you've got 5 extra copies. If you don't have any way of managing your assets, then you are basically buying software in the dark, and that's just going to cost you extra money in the long run. So especially if you have a subscription model, then you'll be able to decide if you need to drop licenses or add licenses. And we will frequently encounter clients that I need a copy of Office, I'm just going to go buy one. And they're not giving any consideration as to how many they have in use already. Do they actually need that extra copy of QuickBooks, or can we work with the licensing that they have right now? And then you also will sometimes find people just, someone quits or gets let go, they may or may not change what licenses they have in use, especially if you're paying for it monthly, then maybe you're just throwing money away. So some other considerations: if you don't have a management platform, hardware age is easy to forget. It's not something you think about unless it's a device that you're using day to day. We see people care about desktops and laptops because they're on them, and they'll notice if they slow down or start having an issue. But how often are you thinking about your network switch? How often are you thinking about your firewall, your server? It's easy to have 7 years slip by and then all of a sudden your server's not doing so great. See it all the time. Typically, you will not notice underperforming systems until they break. That goes into the proactive versus reactive. And asset management is key, especially knowing how long different systems can be kept in production, as well as having a plan for retiring them. So if you say we're replacing every desktop at 5 years, whether or not it's broken, you're going to have a much smoother time overall than if you say we're going to run this computer into the ground until it dies, and it might be 8 years, and it might be running really slowly. Some other considerations for software. Software will get regularly sunset as a means of ensuring vendor revenue. So what that means is, for example, QuickBooks, which is a very common piece of software we encounter, they only let the last 3 years have access to bank statements and credit card processing. So if you're processing credit cards through QuickBooks Desktop, or if you have QuickBooks Desktop, download your bank statements. And right now, that means that 2021, 2020, and 2019 are the only copies of QuickBooks that support those features. That means if you have a copy of 2018, too bad. That no longer works. They purposely break it. So knowing that and keeping track of what versions you have will help prevent the surprise of, oh, I suddenly can't download my bank statements because they just turned off that feature for 2018. Sometimes upgrades stop working. For example, Microsoft, there's no more updates coming out for Windows 7. They stopped updating that for mainstream 2 years ago. That also has to do with support. So if you call Microsoft and say, hey, I need support on Windows 7, they're just going to laugh at you. They say we don't support that. And then how often are you paying for those licenses, or the less expensive ways of managing those licenses? Retail copy of Office is $220. Monthly subscription is $825. So that's where some people prefer the low monthly fee. Some people prefer the retail. The difference is that you buy those retail copies, and now you've got to manage an individual key for every single computer. If you buy a monthly subscription, you just add another subscription if you need more licenses. So there's trade-offs for both of those in that regards. Okay, so wrapping up, asset tracking really enables proactive management, and hopefully that will reduce your long-term costs, because especially if you are replacing things before they become a problem, now you're not paying someone to handle the fire that occurs because a critical system died. You're fixing it before it fails. There's a wide range of options for asset tracking. Some of them are vendor specific, some of them are free, some of them are paid. Basically, you'd want to find something that fits your situation, and I highly recommend having something. It pains me to say that Excel is better than nothing, but it really is, and especially if it's a very small business. And something's better than nothing, and most businesses we encounter have nothing. And so that's a value-added service that we provide, because we come in, we put our enable software on there, and then we have full insight as to everything that's happening within the network. Are there any questions?
Jonathan, I have a question. Do you recommend that you buy the warranties on these products?
Like with everything else in IT, it depends. So when we buy business desktops and laptops and servers, I absolutely say get the warranty, because that's typically a 3-year warranty, and if it's failing within 3 years, that's very much worth replacing. Mm-hmm. If it fails between 3 to 5 years, I can go either way. If your desktop has a motherboard failure 4 years in, that's probably worth getting a whole new computer. But if it has a hard drive fail, I can replace it for $50, like in parts and then labor. So that's reasonable. That's significantly cheaper than buying a whole new desktop. But if it's 5 to 6 years and you've got some critical failure, then that's probably worth replacing, because now the system is old and there's higher chances of other hardware failure at that point. So yeah, and and I would give different advice for firewalls. I'd give different advice for servers. It just depends on the device. It depends on what you think, how long you want it to use, and that's where having an expected replacement date becomes pretty important too.
I think most organizations fail to have this information, and I know personally, it's made me think about what I have and how I need to have that information if something were to break.
Yeah, and I mean, like the question, if we were in person, I would just say, how many computers do you have in your organization? For me, that's a trivial question, because I pull up a report and I can tell at a glance how many computers, a particular client has. But before we walk in there, a lot of people don't even necessarily know. They're surprised. They've got this computer out in the warehouse that no one knew about. It's been sitting there. It's there. It's on their network. It's unpatched. It's a security risk, but it's there.
Well, I can think too about like the organizations that have been impacted by COVID. I know at Southwest Community College, because of COVID, we've hired a lot of new employees and increased that number of laptops and things like that, phones and things like that. And that's not something that I think most of us have really thought about.
Yep.
I could see a small business owner that just adds at a different time. You add a staff person, you add another piece of equipment and software, and it just gets some of those things. I didn't think about that. I didn't think about keeping an inventory or knowing when the warranty and so forth. So I could see how that could quickly jump up on you. Even nonprofits would be in the same boat.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You do it piecemeal, and you hire this person, and someone grabs this random computer, or they find a spare computer that's sitting on a shelf somewhere, and the businesses that we deal with that have the least problems overall are the ones where we can come in and say we're going to buy all these computers and have it's more uniform, right? So we've come in and we've replaced these old computers, and now we know how old these computers are, and we can say this one's due for this upgrade, and it just gives better expectations in uniformity when we're able to come in and upgrade like that.
So the program like Enable that you use, does it give you like if that date expires or if it's getting close to an expiration date for a piece of equipment or whatever, does it notify you, or is that something that you manually have to go in and check often?
So we have options to program all sorts of alerts. My problem is that I get too many alerts. So that's something that we typically keep track of with clients on an individual basis.
Okay.
Jonathan, we have a new employee starting in 2 weeks, and it was so nice. We started doing that a few years ago. I know Becky remembers tracking our whole department's computers, and it's nice when they email you and say, "Hey, it's time for you to get a new computer, and we're going to send the information in and send it over to you." It's like you've won the lottery or something. But the new employee that's coming on, we had an employee that stayed about 6 months or so and went back to her previous position, and so we're able to wipe that computer and get him a pretty much brand new computer without having to pay that expense. And so we had 3 computers, and we just went back and looked to see which serial number was the newest. So
that is great. That's very proactive, and that's awesome. And
it's helped us a lot.
Because now you're not, oops, it failed. Now what do we do?
Exactly. Yeah. So, and we always have a couple on backup too if one of our team members has one that goes down.
I wish I could get more clients to do that.
So there's a question in the chat box. I wonder if you've heard of the Asset Tagger as an asset software management system. Jonathan?
There are so many out there. The ones I talked about are the ones I'm familiar with. There's even more than what I've listed. I'm not familiar with that particular one. There's just so many out there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the reasons that businesses have a hard time with figuring out what to get, because there are so many options that it's overwhelming.
Yep.
So are there any other questions?
There's a question about a company that's been in business for several years and wanted to do some upgrades on a budget. So the question is, where do you recommend they start? Basically, typically we look at the age of all the equipment, and we target the oldest stuff first. Now, that being said, it also depends on what they've purchased. So if you buy a new computer and it has a mechanical drive, for example, it's going to perform slower than an older machine that has a solid state. So I could take a 5-year-old laptop and make it run faster than a brand new computer, just depending on what hard drive is installed. So we do a combination of how old are your different pieces of equipment, your network equipment, your switch, your firewall, your desktops, your laptops. What version of antivirus are you running? What version of your core line of business? If you're running QuickBooks 2015, that's probably a conversation worth having. Can we get you updated to something newer? And just basically look at the oldest and go from there.
Hey, Jonathan, if it's a business and let's just say they've decided to get all new equipment and they decide to lease, is warranties involved in leases in some cases?
That is going to depend on your lease agreement. So we don't typically lease equipment because we're not a bank. But I do know some competitors that will lease, and I've seen those lease agreements, and basically during the period of the lease, they're warranting the equipment. That's that particular vendor. You would need to look at I'm not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer, so you would need to look at the verbiage that's in the lease agreement.
Yeah, I suspect for some businesses, leasing instead of paying all that capital up front might be an option, lease to own. But that's one of those things. I just didn't think about the warranty situation.
Yeah, it would be pretty surprising to lease something without it having some sort of warranty terms, because the person that's leasing you the equipment has a vested interest in making sure that you're able to use it. Because usually there's terms that if it fails, well, you're not going to be paying for something that you're not using.
True.
So they want you to continue to be able to use the product, typically.
Okay, are there any other questions, concerns, questions you want to ask Jonathan or the SBDC or UVA WISE or even Virginia Community Capital?
Well, do you guys have stuff that, do you guys have ways of tracking your own equipment internally? Does your IT department have?
Our IT department does for the
Okay.
colleges, yes.
And the same way with Virginia Community Capital, when it's
Good.
time to upgrade or what have you, they monitor all that.
Excellent.
That's
Yeah.
actually why I'd asked you about Asset Tiger, because we realized quite a few years ago where we're working an economic development authority, a very small team. We don't have those processes in place.
Mhm.
And so it was just about putting the processes in place of, okay, when you get, a piece of equipment. I will tell you that I think your list of what you should track is very useful, because sometimes I don't know what should be included in that inventory versus not included. And so we've had to figure that out. But it's the reason I think Asset Tiger, it was actually kind of one of those that was promoted by where I had gotten the labels from, which were, like you said, totally reasonable. I mean, you can get those for next to nothing. And, setting up the process in the beginning can be cumbersome and time consuming, but in the end, it can be helpful, because then you can go back and look at the purchase date, like, oh, okay, that's why it's messing up, or that's why it's not working very well.
And when you've got, hopefully you can combine your asset management with, say, help desk or something, because now you've got 3 support calls for this particular service ID, in the past 6 months. Well, now you probably need to take a closer look at that particular component. This desktop's had blue screens once a week for the past 4 weeks.
So record that. So record that kind of in your management notes. That's a very good point.
Because that allows you to see trends, especially if a component is starting to fail.
Right.
Okay, anybody else? Last call. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. It's hard to believe that we've already had 9 of the 10 sessions for this series, and our next one will be on June the 10th at noon. And so to finish out our technology series, the final topic that Jonathan will present will be how to recognize scammers, email and phone hygiene, and social engineering. And I definitely look forward to learning more about this topic, and I hope that you guys will join me on June the 10th.
It's going to be a good one.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jonathan. Thanks, team.
Pleasure's always.